Welcome to Change It Up Radio. I'm Paula Shaw, and I am your host, and I am so delighted to be with you today. We've got a lot going on in the world, and we've got a lot to talk about. And my guest today, Mandi Freger, is an expert on millennials and dealing with issues on the autism spectrum. So she's going to have some fascinating insights for us today, because one of the things that occurred to me is that with all the upheaval and everything that's going on in the world today, different segments of the population are experiencing the frustration and the anxiety of what's happening in different ways and on different levels. And Mandi will be joining us in just a little bit to help give us some insight as to how this may be affecting our millennials and people on the autism spectrum. So before we get to that, I want to welcome you once again to Change It Up Radio here with Paula Shaw. Those of you who follow our show know that we are all about change, and boy, do we have a lot to look at these days. It seems like the world is all about change and all about, whoa, the status quo is gone. You know, it was interesting. My son said to me yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, as he was watching protesters gathering for a protest in Hollywood, he was like, "Mom, the world is so bizarre." I mean, he said, nothing's been the same since Kobe Bryant's death. And I thought, isn't that an interesting perspective? But I could hear in his voice, it was like, what is happening? Never before in our lives have we experienced a world pandemic. And now the racial protests and all of the things that are going on, it's like life as we knew it has ceased to exist. And for many people, that is really anxiety provoking. And you know that here on Change It Up Radio, our goal is to either spotlight change makers who are trying to make the world a better place, or to bring you information to help you deal better with change. And also, if you want to hear any of our past shows, because we have just had some of the greatest guests on this show, if you'd like to hear past shows or learn more about being a sponsor or a guest on this show, please go to changeitupradio.com. That's changeitupradio.com. And if you'd like to learn more about my work, most of you know I'm an author of 3 books: Chakras, the Magnificent 7, Grief, When Will This Pain Ever End? And Saying the Right Thing When You Don't Know What to Say. All of those books are available on Amazon.com. And if you'd like to learn more about my work as an author, as a speaker, or as a life transition coach, please go to paulashaw.com. You can learn more there about the tools I use in my work, about energy psychology, which is a method or a whole modality of methods that I really love to work with if people are open to using those techniques, because they bypass talk therapy and the conscious mind and tend to move people through issues much more quickly. Mandi Freger, who you'll be meeting shortly, is a colleague of mine through energy psychology. We've known each other for many years and both work with those tools. So one of the things that has occurred to me in what's going on right now is that it's sort of like change on steroids, right? You know, like I shared with you my son's words the other day, and I think that behind his words were a myriad of emotions: confusion, some fear, anxiety, bafflement, if that's a word. You know, I mean, it's an interesting time. You know, it's an interesting time that nobody on the planet has ever lived through before. There are people on the planet like my dad, who you met last week, who've lived through world wars. There are people who have lived through many, many difficult experiences, apartheid and women's rights, fighting for civil liberties. All of those things have happened even in my lifetime. But nobody on the planet has lived through a pandemic, and now at least here in the US, and we do have supporters in other countries I know who are marching as well. We are now in the throes of protests about racial discrimination, police brutality, many things that in my mind should not even be issues in 2020. Because it's hard to believe that at this point in the history of man, that everybody doesn't get it, that we're all one, that everybody doesn't get it, that a skin color doesn't make a difference between one human being and another. I mean, we accept the fact that we look different, that some of us have light hair, some of us have dark hair, some of us have curly hair, some of us have straight hair. We seem to be okay with that. But what does it matter if somebody's ancestors came from a different place than yours, or their skin is a different color? That I don't get. I truly don't get it. And I think that many people on the planet are going, yeah, this should not be happening. This should not be a reality in this day and age. And so what's happening? What we're seeing is upheaval. What we're seeing is what happens when people have reached a level of frustration and anger that they just don't know what to do with themselves. And so they're acting out. And it's messy. It's really messy. And I know a lot of people are sitting in judgment. A lot of people are saying, well, violence isn't the way, you know, rioting and looting shouldn't happen. And of course, nobody's going to stand here and say rioting is good, looting is good. Now, we all know that. But we have to look at, why are these things happening? What has preceded this? What created the level of frustration and anger that's going on in our world right now, particularly here in the US? And I think the words that I've heard recently that so rang with truth, that I really loved, were the words of Trevor Noah, who said, you know, we have this agreement in society that certain things are okay and we'll do them, and certain things are not. It's not okay to kill someone. We all agree to drive on the same side of the street and stop at the red light and slow down at the yellow and go on the green. There are things we agree on. And so if everybody does what they say they're going to do, and if they follow the rules of that society, then we can all agree on those things peacefully and everything's fine. But when a segment of the society breaks the rules, especially if that segment are the people who are supposed to be the peacekeepers, the people who are to enforce the law, when those things happen over and over and over again, the people to which they're happening, in this case, the Black people of America, finally say, why should we keep our part of this agreement about the rules when you're not keeping yours? And that's pretty huge. And it certainly makes a lot of sense. Do I want to see people looting and rioting? Absolutely not. I'll tell you what I want to see more of, and that I have seen in this week that brought me to tears. Law enforcement officers and protesters taking a knee together. That is the energy that will solve this problem. That is the energy that says, I get it, that we're fellow humans. I get it, that we're all in this together. So let's take a knee together. Let's find solutions together. You don't have to fight me. I'm in this with you. I will take a knee with you and acknowledge your upset, acknowledge your fear, acknowledge your pain. And that, I think, is what will find a solution to these terrible problems that we're experiencing. But one of the things that occurred to me before our show today is that what's happening in the world is impacting different members of the society in different ways. You know, the people with autism are perceiving what's happening in a different way. Millennials are perceiving from a different perspective. And I thought it would be interesting today to talk to someone who has expertise in dealing with these populations and getting an understanding and an idea of how they may be perceiving what's happening. I know I have 2 millennial children, and I think they're perceiving things very differently, even though they were raised in the same way. And so I think we all need more insight and understanding of what's going on with everybody else. And that's why I've invited Mandi Freger to spend some time with us in this show today. So when we come back from this break, I am very excited to introduce you to Mandi Freger. So stay with us. We will be right back. Okay. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio, here with Paula Shaw. I am so happy to have you here with me today because I think it's going to be a really amazing show. My goal and the goal of my guest today is to give you some insight into a segment of the population, the millennials and people with who are on the autism spectrum, and get some understanding of how they may be experiencing what is happening in our country right now. Because there is a lot of fear, there's a lot of anxiety, there are a lot of people who are feeling frustrated and powerless and not knowing what to do. And I think it behooves us all to better understand our fellow man. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about Mandi Freger. She has over 20 years of experience in counseling with adolescents and millennials and using energy psychology tools with this population as well, dealing with issues on the autism spectrum and with peak performance, general fatigue, anxiety, depression, and trauma. She's pretty much worked with everybody and seen everything out there that humans experience as a response to what is going on in their world. So without any further ado, Mandi, please join us and let's talk a little bit about what's happening with millennials. Hi.
Hi, Paula. How are you?
I'm very good. Good to see you.
Excited to be here. Yeah.
Great. And Mandi, you know, I forgot to mention you have an upcoming book. Do you want to tell us the title of that book?
I do. This book is actually for caregivers of those who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders, and it's from exhausted to energized. And I'm really happy to say that I can bring both of my lenses and expertises together using ABA, using autism, as well as energy psychology to deliver this package, which has helped so many of my families that I've worked with. So I'm really excited about that.
Oh, I am too. From exhausted to energized, you said?
Yeah, the caregiver's guide to autism spectrum disorders and treating that. And part of the platform with that, and what I'll segue into today, is that people that know and work with me, I talk in spectrums. So I talk about the autism spectrum as, a bell curve, a spectrum. And I have this concept, non-spectrum spectrumers. And these are the people who, I don't love the word neurotypical, or people, who, whose brains are X, Y, or Z. So I call these people the people who are formally not diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder. But there's a bell curve of people who are diagnosed, who aren't, and then I like to bring them together as one continuum of individuals and people. So this model and the way that I think, and maybe what I can present today that might be helpful, is based on that lens and how I think about spectrum.
Beautiful. I'm going to switch us here to gallery view so we can chat with each other. So you heard what I was saying in that first segment, and what's going on. And by the way, I want to say, I can't wait to get a hold of a copy of your book and to recommend it to many of my clients, because I have many clients who are caregivers, not necessarily just with people on the autism spectrum, but other kinds of long-term conditions, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, those sorts of things. And I'm sure a lot of the principles you share are equally applicable for many of those people as well. And I don't think people realize clearly enough how tough it is to be a caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough being a caregiver because you sort of have to put your life in the background and put the life of the person you're caring for in the foreground. And that can make life tough, really tough. And it can be exhausting, can't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
This is where our gifts of energy psychology come in, Paula, and we'll hopefully talk about that later, and how much this has been, literally lifesavers for so many people.
Oh, yeah, definitely so. So what is it, Mandi, that you want to share with us, or that you'd like us to understand off the top about millennials and other people who are, maybe perceiving a little differently than we're perceiving about what's happening in the world right now?
Yeah, so when we spoke about what I would talk about today, I had some ideas. So I did take some notes. So if you can bear with me for the first couple sessions, because what I'm about to talk about is what I find myself bringing to therapy sessions. And I have a pretty large caseload that I work with, and it happened to evolve to millennials as being a lot of my caseload. And as I was telling you the other day, Paula, I kind of raised millennials in the way that early on in my career, I started working with young people who weren't much younger than I was. And so span my career, I've seen a lot of this age group in a lot of different, in a lot of different ways, through a lot of different lenses. And first things first, right? How do you define a millennial? Is this an age group? I know we were talking about that the other day too.
Yeah.
And what I'm about to present to you really is more of a mindset. But to conceptualize this, I think for people who are listening, generally, I would say age 25-ish to 40-ish. And again, this is a mindset. It's a socio-cultural, kind of historical type of way of looking at generations is what I'm about to present. So with that in mind, let me get started on some of these concepts that I present to my clients. And again, I love bell curves, and this may not resonate with everybody. This may resonate with, certain niches of the population, but let's just consider this as food for thought and to just challenge everybody to look through a different lens about it. So I'm going to pan out and talk very generally, and then we'll get more specific about some of the questions and what's going on in the world now. So the way that I see this through a historical lens in America is that more and more younger Americans are moving farther and farther away from their country of origin status as our country ages, right? Meaning how many generations beyond immigrant status in this country from the institutionalized inception of our country. Because we're a young country, right? We're a relatively young country. And when I talk to clients, when I talk to people in my social life, when we think about immigrants who were coming into the country, in the younger and on our infant years,
Yeah.
as America, they were coming here to seek freedoms and to avoid hardships.
Mm-hmm.
So generally, the first and second generations of people coming into this country were heavily rooted in survival values. We work to earn a living to eat. We're looking for basic shelter. And if we
Right.
think about Maslow's pyramid and hierarchy of needs for the therapists out there,
Uh-huh.
these things that I just mentioned are foundational needs in life. So this created, to me, a survival mechanism where with any given stressor in any of these areas, it keeps the brain in fight, flight, or freeze. And so this is what we talk about in energy psychology, which we'll put on pause because I'm sure you have a lot to say about that, Paula, right? Yeah. And so this plan ahead, need to survive type of value system was passed down to the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
And where is the stress tipping point, though, for planning ahead? And in my mind, it's when it turns to anticipatory anxiety,
Mm.
right? We
And
need to.
are you saying that millennials are more prone to anticipatory anxiety?
I'm getting there. I think that it's a generational piece that it's been perpetuated.
Mm.
So in my opinion, what I think has happened then is the next generation, or maybe two, began to develop some of this anticipatory anxiety. Past this, let's just plan ahead and be strategic. However, they were also gaining different resources with this. We're
Mm-hmm.
obtaining and able in our country, right, to gain more resources. So as
Right.
immigrant parents also held their value for their children to do better than they did, right? How many of us out there have heard from our grandparents, you're going to do better than I did. You're going to make it. You're going to be more successful.
Right.
Many of their children were able to do that in a way that resources had great potential to be obtained under these ideals of our country's mission.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what I see is the anxiety becoming generational but shifting. So it began as this raw survival mechanism with the
Uh-huh.
earlier people coming into the countries. And, I could sidebar and talk about our EP roots and talk about them carrying anxiety from an epigenetic mechanism, which that's probably a whole other series of
Oh,
shows.
that's fascinating. We'll get into that in another show.
Yeah. But so we continue to hold this value of doing better, which potentially manifested, I see it as in needing more.
As what? Can you say that again, man?
Yeah, the value of doing better, I see it as really manifesting into needing more, needing more,
Needing.
but needing more, whatever it is, more
Mm,
stuff, more, just more.
right.
And some people could label this greed. Some people, I'm just using the word more to refrain from, a judgmental lens, but this concept of going from survival to wanting more.
So what comes to my mind is since we're not so survival focused now, we have food and shelter and that sort of thing pretty easily. Excuse me. Um, why would our children, our millennials, be more prone to this anticipatory anxiety? It feels like they've always had everything.
Oh, that's a great question. Great question, which let me deviate from the anxiety piece a little bit and let me talk about another integral part of my practice, which is parenting. And let me shift to how I see how parenting has changed with respect to some of these aforementioned values. And so the parenting focus from what I just discussed in immigrants was really teaching survival, which
Right,
equated to teaching your child what hardships were and how to survive through
right.
them, right? So this was considered great parenting back then. That's
Yeah.
what you did. We survived. We're good.
Hmm.
So and people also back then, I think, turned to spirituality a little bit more.
True.
And again, I'm not a historian. These are my observations from what I've seen and heard through my life experience. But I also suspect that there was much more intrinsic motivation, but in the way that maintaining a core belief also, which was carried from a lot older times, that external factors were significant contributing to
Hmm.
your success, people giving me a chance, opportunities available, and then potentially the strength of my religion, and
Hmm.
my faith, whatever that is for those people. And so
Right.
you fast forward a generation or two from American immigrants. And new parents begin to think, and I've heard this so many times throughout the years from parents, wait a minute, I'm not going to raise my kids the way that my parents did. I didn't
Exactly.
do anything. I was way too restricted. I didn't get to do anything. However, neglecting to understand the function underlying why their ancestors raised them in that way. And it was to withstand hardship. So we're moving
Mandy,
away from,
I hate to stop you right there because I'm on the edge of my seat, but we got to take a little break
okay,
and we'll come right
good.
back to this point right here about withstanding hardship. And we'll be right back. Okay, if you're ready, let's just go. Let me reset my clock here. Okay. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio here with Paula Shaw. My guest today is Mandi Freger, who has many years of expertise in working with millennials and people on the autism spectrum. And we are talking right now about anxiety among this particular population as a result of what's going on today. And Mandi was just getting ready to explain to us why these children of ours, who seem to have always had everything and you would think have nothing to worry about, seem to be prone to anticipatory anxiety. Okay, Mandi, break the code for us.
Yeah. So I was just concluding with, how the older generations, right, taught us how to withstand hardship. And really, it was the mentality, just suck it up and survive.
Yeah.
Right. And us in modern mental health, right, we were like, oh my goodness, we have to really work through all this now because we don't want to stay in that mindset anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward to these more recent generations, farther removed from basic survival hardships, want to make life for their kids a paradise. Right.
Right.
I have it all. I am in, the best country in the world. So, I feel like my child should be respected, which means they have rights to say. But my emotional body as a parent can't stand to see my kids be upset for anything.
Right.
So this created a bit of a shift then within the whole bell curve, right, of American society where everybody can win. These are sort of the cultural things that have been happening, right, in the past 30 years, 40 years. Everybody can win. Everybody gets a trophy. We saw spankings, right? How many of us were young and, kids got lickings at school? It doesn't happen anymore,
No.
right? Any type of physical punishment. I've even worked with school districts where it's been difficult for the school to even assert any professional opinions about behavior without the pushback from parents. So we have extremes there too. And then bully awareness, right, is becoming more and more recognized.
Mm-hmm.
Mental health is drawing more attention. So these are just a few things off the top of my head that stand out. Oh, and let's not forget about adding emerging technologies.
Oh, yes.
And moving from more to two-parent working households, again, not to
Mm-hmm.
exclude single parents, but having two parents work and latchkey kids. I don't even know if that's a phrase anymore. That was one of the first kind of phrases, I think, back in the 80s and 90s, where kids had their own keys and they would come home. For those of you who don't know this, right, and they would let themselves in the
Haven't been
door.
on the planet that long. So I can't stand it. So why, with all these great things they've had, why are they anxious? Why
Yeah.
this anticipatory anxiety?
So this starts to fade, right? In this lifestyle that emerged in America. Old America, new America, has really changed. What's the difference? Time. I think time is a huge factor. So if you refer to the points that I just talked about through the American generations thus far, and how has that contributing to parental values that shifted? So let's talk about the profile of the millennial parent. Again, a bell curve. But some patterns that seem to emerge are, these parents are overworked, overstressed, and
Mm-hmm.
then they start to wonder, how did my parents do all this? They seemed happy and thin and never complained. And let me sidebar about why I use the word thin, because I hear this word, my parents looked good. And this perception of this, of course, opens a whole other can of worms about how a faster paced lifestyle with less time can also contribute to compromised wellness care, grabbing food on the go, and less exercise time. We have that luxury to get fast food quickly to save
Mm-hmm.
time. And so now we're realizing, oh yeah, we should have taken care of our mental health too, right? That's not too late, which is the good news. So let's talk the current state of millennials and how they're manifesting anxiety, in my experience. So
Mm-hmm.
growing up with this generation and these parenting types of strategies, when I work with the parents and see the results of our kids, in a nutshell, here's what's difficult, I think, for a lot of these kids in the past and even in their present state. So I'm going to just bullet point some of these things and maybe we'll stop for some discussion with these. So the first point is really using and developing metacognitive skills. And metacognitive skills are how to integrate, this is just an example, advanced moral problem solving outside of the ego and take action. And then my question is really, did other generations do this? They may have, but the problem solving was at a different level,
Mm-hmm.
right? Back to those basic needs. Now I'm talking advanced moral problem solvings, like the current state of affairs, what's going on now, and we have to make a lot of difficult decisions. The second piece that stands out to me is the observable behavioral demonstrations of anxiety is different in millennials.
Mm-hmm.
So there's more anxiety, but we can see it, right?
And how do we, what are we seeing? What should parents be looking for that is our manifestations of anxiety?
Well, I think for younger kids, especially, overdependence on parents, asking, questioning a lot,
Mm-hmm.
questioning for reassurance. I think this is an easy one that goes under the radar with time,
Mm.
and sometimes it goes to the other extreme where sometimes a parent feels they need to over reassure, which leads me to the third point is an over reliance on the person rather than providing the tools
Oh,
for
that's a good one.
themselves.
Yeah, say more about that.
Yeah, so if as a parents, we want to just fix the problem
Right.
and make the child feel good,
We don't want our children to suffer or be in pain or
yeah,
be in an emotionally hurt place.
it doesn't give them their own coping tools. And really to teach kids coping strategies takes a lot of time. That's what I did for a lot of years. I've managed and overseen a lot of clinicians going into homes to teach the kids these strategies, to teach the parents how to teach the kids these strategies. And I just want to say, please don't interpret this as a critique on this generation of parents. Nobody taught these parents how to adjust,
Right?
right? My parents just did all this. I don't think it's more accurate to say, right? How do I do this? It looked so flawless for them.
Yes.
They just did it. But life changed, the world changed. Why do we need tools? Well, did your parents have tools? No, they just sucked it up and did it.
Yeah.
And then we have a lot
And
more.
sometimes that was a great experience for some people, and sometimes it was a terrible experience, depending on your parents' frame of mind, your parents' upbringing, your parents' experiences.
Yeah.
So, it was a up in the air kind of ball of worms, and you just didn't know who was going to get what. Some people got great values and great experiences with their parents and great teaching, and
Mhm.
others didn't.
And the values too, not to undermine, any parent isn't trying to teach their children values. I think most good parents are, but are the values relevant and are to the time?
Hmm.
Do they match? Do they align?
Yeah.
And this is another point, that things are just changing so fast that to teach
Hmm.
the frustration tolerance in this generation was really, tough, because things were just happening too quick. You know,
Hmm.
and that's sad, the piece too, that this generation hasn't had a lot of opportunity. You said earlier that, this is the first time we've experienced a world pandemic. How many times have you heard from your elders growing up, right? I lived through World War II. I lived through the Great Depression.
Right.
Those generations identified significant events, that were really stressful on a collective level for them.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
this is really the first series of events, and it's not just one thing. Now we're into two, three, you know, keep the numbers going, hopefully not, but about cumulative stress this year.
Hmm.
So then let's add the piece for the millennials, that the resource change, the debt issues, right? So like, not unlike their parents or their grandparents, they're in a different position financially
Hmm.
too.
Hmm.
The last point that I think is different about millennials and younger generations, and see this all the time. They teach me so much when I have them as clients, is this questioning of spirituality. Of all the generations, I see in this one the most. I'm not sure if a lot of people even realize it, but it appears to be as evidenced through direct statements, but also incongruent beliefs. Looping back to my first point about social metacognition, I think I believe this. I don't identify as this or this, but this is kind of what I believe, but I don't know if I believe this. I value this, but I'm not sure about this.
Mhm.
All of this falls under a blanket of questioning in spirituality and in values. And this is a huge area that I focus on when I see this group for therapy, because I think that they're all exploring in
Yeah.
way.
And of course, a certain amount of that is natural in every adolescent, right? But now we complicate that a little bit more with this generation. I mean, I remember when I was a child, you heard things like children are to be seen and not heard. Go to your room until you can behave. Now, parents are teaching their children to talk, to express their feelings, to work through things. So you're creating a very different kind of being, maybe one who's less obedient and less prone to just follow the rules and not question them. I mean, my generation was one of the first to start questioning things with the Vietnam War protests and women demanding equal rights. But my parents' generation, you didn't question anything. You did what was prescribed that good, responsible, all American people did.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we've created these, I hesitate to say little Frankensteins or monsters because they're not. They're actually so beautiful, but they force us. I mean, I've got two of them. They force you to step back and look at your own behavior, your own beliefs, and they are so quick to call bullshit on the things people do that aren't right to do
Mhm.
to other human beings. My daughter just launched a book a couple of weeks ago, and last week announced on Facebook that all the royalties were being donated to the NAACP because that's how strongly she feels about human rights not being honored out there.
Mhm.
And we have to go to a break right now, man. I mean, this is just going by so fast, but when we come back, let's continue this discussion. We'll be right back. Okay. Are you ready to go? This is our last segment.
Oh
I'll
my
let-
goodness.
I know it goes by fast. So, any really important points that we want to make,
Yes.
let's
I'm good. Yeah. Hmm.
we'll make about them now. And we haven't really discussed the autistic kids much, so we might want to get into that. All right, ready? I'm going to have a little sip myself. This will all be Facebook people. This will be edited out in the final radio version. And by the way, this show, for those of you who want to share Mandi's show, will be on every podcast platform next week. And of course, it'll be right here on Facebook from this moment on. Okay, here we go. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio with Paula Shaw. My guest, Mandi Freger, is an expert with millennials, people on the autism spectrum, and she has been sharing some interesting insights with us about what our millennial kids particularly may be perceiving or how they may be feeling about what's going on in the circumstances of the world and our country right now. So, Mandi, we were just talking about this anticipatory anxiety. And if I got what you were saying correctly, is it that you were saying that part of the reason our millennial kids are prone to that is because we've kind of jumped in and solved a lot of the problems for them, and so they don't have the kind of tools they need to be able to cope on their own? Is that true?
Yes, but again, this is a time factor. I think this is a broader, again, panning out. This is a bigger picture issue that it's not, oh, parents didn't do a good job. This
Mhm.
is society changed so fast,
Ah,
and the time and the lifestyle changed so fast. Think about it. Think about specific times when you jumped in and solved a problem for your kid. Chances are there were some of those times where you just didn't have time,
mhm.
right? getting
absolutely.
dressed for school, getting them out the door in the morning. I
Yeah,
can't tell you how many times through the years, just do it. I'll have to help you along because we're on a time crunch. So,
absolutely.
so no blame intended, but just looking about how things have changed. And so with that being said, I want to wrap up. I want to say about, this is just my hypothesis of what I think we're going to see come out of the millennials. And, people always say, oh, you're just so anti-millennial. I'm completely not anti-millennial, but what I think they're going to bring to the table, this generation, is one, a relentless attitude. Why isn't this happening fast enough?
Hmm.
Right? Like you said earlier, we have a responsibility. We slow things down. We follow rules. I think that the itch in this generation is going to last, if they have really good focus. So this
Hmm.
whole extremist thinking, I think, is actually a great catalyst for this next level of change.
Yes.
I haven't been told no. I haven't really learned really great self-restraint in some cases, and I don't have experience with restrictions. So, hey, this is like a perfect combination of movement, right?
Mm.
How to change things for the better at the right place at the right time. I think perhaps we might be seeing a turn back and an inward introspection of one's own spirituality. Dr. Bill Tiller, I'm a big fan of his. He implies that, right, inherent in quantum physics, that there's something outside of ourselves. So emerging physics might be a direction that this generation might lean toward, right? We got
Mm.
proof, maybe.
Hmm.
But I also hear them saying, on the other hand, praying isn't enough. They've heard this from their family members. Pray about it. Focus on this, which again leads me back to that first point of action. This
Yes.
might be, I can't do that. We need to do something. And how much
Yes.
have we seen this in the media in the past week? Which
Mm.
brings me to the last point, a new media. Where is the truth? This generation is not content with a bipartisan media at all. Everybody has access to a platform these days. And I
Right.
believe, this polar approach isn't cutting it for them.
Mm.
So I think that, this might be the group that takes action. They're the ones who are questioning, and I've heard this exact statement just this week from several people. They question who is writing the narrative.
Oh, yeah.
Who is writing the narrative? So
Yes.
I think that there's great hope. And what I'd like to suggest is that millennials out there who are listening, or parents who are thinking, oh, that sounds like my child, energy psychology tools are amazing for this. This is when I'm using these with millennials, you see them leaps and bounds take ownership and responsibility that
Mm.
sounds like I talked about for an hour, that they're unable to be responsible. That's not what I'm saying. There's so much inner conflict and confusion, which
Mm.
looks like clinical anxiety. But once they start to align, start to make sense of their own inner truth and move forward, we've got some potential there. So that's what I love about using energy psychology with them.
Mm. That's so great to know, because I'm wondering how many get exposed to energy psychology rather than CBT or some other kind of talk therapy, which I feel like there's a level of frustration that builds up in talk therapy because they want to move. They want
Right,
things
right.
different. I certainly see that with my own. And what about people on the autism spectrum? How do you think they're handling this kind of situation right now?
Yeah, this is an interesting group with us. These kids usually, because of the way that their executive functioning works and neurocognition, are very good at adhering to rules. So
Ah.
it was sort of a catch-22 when, all the rules changed.
Mm.
But then again, here are the new rules. So I'm talking maybe COVID, for example, when this started. We can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this, but here's what we're going to do. So when we replace a sort of rule-bound structure with a new rule system, in my opinion, it's a little bit easier to make that shift than over emotionally attaching to the loss of this rule. Not to say that some people don't. Some people do. Some kids did. But when
Mm-hmm.
you iterate and just reinforce the new rules, this is kind of opposite of what I just talked about. When we make it a little bit more concrete for this population, when we make it a little bit more black and white, depending on the parent or the surrounding family's opinions about how to move forward in these times, it's a little bit easier. And I did a video, a shout out to all my kids who have spectrum disorders. And I work with really young adults now, not really any young kids at this time, but they've done an awesome job with being flexible during this time. And that's one of the hardest things usually that they
Uh-huh.
have difficulties with. So yeah, why can't I go out? But if you say, well, it's not time, we won't know until this day. Okay, it's a little bit of an easier accept on that way. Now, what I think has been very detrimental to this population is the mixed messages that we see in media, because a lot of the young adults diagnosed with spectrum disorders tend to watch mainstream media. You watch one channel, you get one message. You get another channel, you get another message. And depending on which message is the most pleasing, not that we all don't do this, we adhere to that message.
Mm-hmm.
And then as if it's truth, then it will happen. And we all know that we've lived through COVID, that a lot of these messages, sometimes things played out that way, sometimes they didn't. And
Right.
so it was like a TBD thing. But yeah, so on the whole, the people that I'm working with right now did okay, but they were also families who were very prepared for changes and transition generally.
Good point.
With their kids for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So for parents who haven't had a lot of interaction with these types of structures for their kids when they were younger, I can imagine that this time has probably been really difficult.
How much do you think the kids are affected by or picking up on the energy of their parents at all ages?
Well, this is probably part 2, 3, and 4 of the show, because this is where we go into energy psychology, right? And the fields, and how much when we're the collective, and how much we pick up from other people. We talk about this all the time too, right? Babies, that's what they're doing. They're learning their environment from a sensory perspective. And
Right.
to, in my opinion, lose that as we develop language. Some of us, most of us
Mm-hmm.
develop her. So picking up the younger kids, absolutely. Older kids, cognitively, I think more so. They see the behaviors and the stress of the parents, and then kind of call them out on it, or like,
Yeah.
yeah. So absolutely. I mean, what we know about energy, right? This is all symbiotic.
It's so interesting to me because I know a lot of the adults are all over the place right now. So and you might think you're one place, then you sit down with a group of friends, or you do a Zoom with a certain group, and now they're bringing all their fears or all their information or misinformation into the mix, and now you shift. And so on some levels, I mean, my children no longer live at home, but I can imagine it must be bong, 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 bong for a lot of kids right now, because that's what we adults are experiencing too.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I think is kind of a real big problem right now is there's so much fear out there. So there's way too much adrenaline going on. And when we're operating from that place, we get into that reptilian brain and that fight, flight, or freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the other one somebody told me today, or shoot, I can't remember it, but it's kind of like just, stop. But it's not quite freeze, and darn, I can't think of the word. But anyway, obviously, when the frontal cortex is shut off, good linear thinking and problem solving and decision making are not happening on the same level. Hence, what happens sometimes when a peaceful protest turns into a riot. And I think it's got to be very confusing and upheaving for our kids, all our kids, adult kids, young kids, adolescent kids. It's a tough time. So if we could, what would you advise parents right now, Mandi? What's the best way to be dealing with your kids, no matter who they are right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think let's embrace the luxury of the time we do have, if we still are in partial isolation or doing things like that, and use the quality time to really have these heart-to-heart discussions with your kids. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn about your kids. And even on a broader scale, what I would suggest as far as world change, for people who are out there saying, what can I do? Really, my advice would be to go within yourself and really explore your fears. If we look at what's going on in the world, these are big fear. These are people who are fearful. These are groups who are fearful.
Yes.
We as individuals go in and we're examining and doing the work on ourselves. This is going to influence the collective on such a broader scale. And this is what we as energy therapists, we live and breathe this stuff. But for people who aren't familiar with that, that is so powerful to be able to really get in that love vibration and away from fear.
And you know what? I think for people who aren't familiar with the kind of thing you're saying, maybe it's all summed up in that great line, be the change you want to see in the world. And on that note, I want to just say, Mandi, thank you so much for enlightening us on so many levels. And I really love this piece that you're ending with, that because I know a lot of times people during times like this feel helpless, they feel frustrated, they feel powerless. But you're not powerless if you're taking it upon yourself to go within, to clean up your own stuff, to find out what your fears are about. And in healing yourself, you do the best thing you can do for your children, right?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
for the world.
Yes, absolutely. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. Mandi, thank you so much. And again, tell us the name of your upcoming book.
From Exhausted to Energized, the Caregiver's Guide to Treating and Working with Your Child with Autism Spectrum Disorders. Yeah.
Beautiful. And this show will air in San Diego on AM 1170 and 96.1 FM Sunday evening at 9. Next week, it will be on every major podcast platform and, of course, here on Facebook. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you again next week on Change It Up Radio with Paula Shaw.